Hi, Austin Church here with my friend Nick Capozzi. I'm going to let Nick introduce himself, but one of the more interesting things about Nick is that he kind of got his start in sales on cruise ships. I don't want to steal your thunder, friend, so why don't you share a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, happy to. First of all, nice to see you again. Always a pleasure, Austin.
Likewise.
I had a bit of an interesting background, and why it's interesting is because my career and everything I do right now is based around selling and business development and how that messaging looks and how we talk and sell. But I don't sell anything, and I never have.
Hmm.
And it was interesting because I was in broadcast, I was in radio. And one day at a party, I was trying to make a career in radio. And one day at a party in Toronto, someone said, "Hey, can you do that radio thing from the stage?" Next thing I know, I stepped onto a cruise ship in Miami and actually spent 20 years in the cruise business. And what was interesting was when I got there, I was, in my mind, hospitality, right? I'm the name badge on my chest. I'm hotel first, Royal Caribbean, Disney, Norwegian, wherever it was. And I got into sales more as a presenter of sales. But in my head, I could never say, well, I sell or I'm in sales. So how the technique I developed over the years was kind of a removing barriers, getting people engaged, getting them interested in what you're talking about, and letting them kind of really fall into your lap.
Hmm.
And the way that works is with genuine engagement and great messaging. And those were the two ways that I really learned how to be a salesperson without ever having sold a thing, because I have never sold a thing. I just get people excited about it.
I love what you said about removing barriers. And I think if you believe in what you're selling or not selling, as it were, if you believe in the product or the service, then you can reframe it as serving and think, well, what is standing between people and this outcome that they could have? But what are the obstacles, and how do you, as a person who's setting up the sale, come in and do?
So I think the best way to think about it is that, and I know Austin, just given, knowing you a little bit, you deal with a lot of solopreneurs and freelancers, right? So establishing yourself and establishing your value really comes down to the messaging and how you lay that out. And that's the first part of the equation. But the second is when it comes back to your initial question of removing barriers is, are you easy to do business with? Because the reality is most people aren't. They think they are. They think, well, I've got a great service. I'm really good at what I do. But the reality is you're not easy to do business with. And I'll give you a great example. I spend a lot of time actually working with dentists, believe it or not. And what's interesting is that dentistry is like 20 years behind the times. If I want to book an appointment with a dentist, I got a call. And then anywhere from 30% to 40% of dental offices don't answer, right? And they're not available after hours or on the weekends. Well, that doesn't fit my life. On my phone, I can, order a pizza, or I can make an impulsive purchase on Amazon. I can be here in 2 hours. That's easy to do business with, right? How can I not schedule an appointment? If it's Saturday and my neighbor just got like some veneers done and they look fantastic. Maybe my wife's had a couple Mike's Hard Lemonades, and she's like, wait a minute, I want to get in to see my dentist now. How do I do that? Right.
And you can't.
You can't, right? So that's one of the things that I deal with them is like, how do you make yourself easier to do business with? Because in their minds, they're doctors first, and rightfully so. But they are. Anytime you own a business or you hang your own shingle, if the banner is yours, you are the head of every department in your business, even if you're just a freelancer, and that includes sales, right? So when you understand that, I think it gives you a huge advantage. So being easy to do business with, great messaging, that's really important. And that's something that I think a lot of people really miss on is great messaging. When you put those two things together, and then just consistency, but understanding and acknowledging that I am the tip of the sword. I am, if my business, if my flag is my banner is going to fly high, it's going to be me putting in that effort. The reality is it doesn't take a lot of time. People are just so afraid of rejection, right?
So say more about that fear of rejection. In your experience, is it as bad as we imagine it to be?
First time is terrifying. Second time gets a little bit easier.
Right.
But you know what? It's I'll put it into a really easy term. The more times you get knocked down, the easier it is to get back up.
Hmm.
I've done a little martial arts and stuff just for fun, just trying to keep my old body in shape. But what happens, or what's interesting is that, the first time you get thrown down to the mat, I mean, that hurts, that stings, that doesn't feel good. But then the second time's a little bit less, third time's a little bit, if you do it 10 times, 15 times, there's no more sting.
Mm-hmm.
Now, it's still emotional if I've had 4, 5, 10 conversations with you and you don't buy at the end. But that's again, just going through it. But if a great way to again, do business easily and make yourself do business with is, how do I give value initially? So one of the things, if I want an excuse to reach out to you, Austin, because I want to try and get in front of you, what can I offer you? Can I maybe offer a quick video? Hey, here's a 90-second video on something that would be really helpful for your business, if there's value in that for you. But now when you watch that, you're like, oh, that's really interesting. Actually, this guy's pretty good. Maybe I want him to actually talk to me about sales. One of the things, my cousin has a fantastic technology development shop. And one of the things, he leases out a lot of his developers. And if I'm hard to do business with, I'm like, well, okay, here's my case studies and here's what I've done. And that's it. That's our conversation. Or I could say, hey, I tell you what, Austin, take my guy for a day. Take him and have him code with your team for 8 hours.
Nice.
If you like him, we'll figure something out. If it's not the right fit, no problem. Right? What have I done? I just made myself easy to do business with. Who's going to turn that down? But most people would say, I'm not giving away 8 hours. No, why would I do that? Right? But the reality is I've given away so much time over the years, and it's come back to me more than tenfold.
It's so good. Like a little generosity on the front end in the form of a video where you share value, in the form of not a freebie, because it's like freebies are kind of easy. Like, here's your assessment, and you're like, okay, thanks. That was generic and boilerplated. But you're talking about like learning enough about a prospect's needs so that the front end value will be much more personalized, much more custom. And yeah, it's like, of course you've got my attention now. And we just like being around generous people. I think it sets the tone for the rest of the relationship. Like, if you can afford to be generous at the beginning, then you must be doing well. So the optics are good too.
I think too is, every time I've given away something for free, now it's one thing to say, here's a taste test, here's an appetizer, right? But anytime I've given away something for free, people don't see the value in it anymore. So what is your time worth, Austin, right? And if you're thinking from a seller point of view of your own business or your own flag, how does that look in terms of what's your per hour, right? What do you feel your value is? And it's always way more than you think it is. If you have any kind of quality product or service, your value is exponentially greater than you think it is. And that's a place people make mistakes, is that only when they start to just push the boundary every single time, they're like, well, now instead of getting $100 an hour, you get 125. Then a year later, you're charging 300. You don't really have any more unique case studies, but now that's what you're getting per hour. And then wait a minute, well, why can't I charge 750? Right. And I think what's interesting, Austin, is that it's also, there's a relationship between what you're charging per hour and the type of client that you want to work with, right? So I would rather learn, if I knew nothing about sales, I would rather learn some basic sales process and sales skills and spend way less time doing fulfillment of $250 an hour work, put a little bit more time to business development on the $750 an hour work. And then at the end of the day, I'm making the same amount of money in a quarter of the time. So then I can either self-scale, or I can say, well, this is a nice, lifestyle business or lifestyle brand that I have.
So I want to double click on two things. One, the fine line between being generous with consultation or advice on the front end and how will people tend to ignore free advice, and then some of what you said about sales basics, sales fundamentals. So how do you recommend that people walk that line? Because you're right. If you give me advice about martial arts, for example, and I'm not paying you to be my trainer yet, it's so easy for me to ignore the advice, right? So what do you recommend?
So I think, again, when you just give value, here's the thing. Let's say you have 100 prospects. It's really not that many, right? And if you can just take notes, one of the things I always do is I always have a notepad at the ready. So if I'm talking to someone, I'm scribbling down a few things, a few notes. Those notes, what the one tool you want is some sort of CRM. HubSpot's got a great free one if you're a solopreneur, but you want to be able to track. And if I talk to Austin and I'm looking, looks like you might have some bourbon bottles in the back.
Right.
Your setup. So if I see something interesting about a limited edition bourbon that's coming out in Eastern Tennessee, because I know that that's where you're based, to be like, hey man, just saw this article, you popped into my head. I don't know if you're collecting these. Now, you know what? That's being relational. And I think if you do want to be a solopreneur or a freelancer or a small to medium sized business owner, you want to have some of those relational skills, right? You want to be able to get out in front of people. But the thing is that when something comes up and I have my 100 prospects and something's relevant, or I find an article that relates to something specifically you're working on, right? So let's say I know that you work with a lot of digital marketing agencies, just as an example. One of the things I would say to you is, if I'm tracking on Google News or any kind of alerts, hey, it's super interesting. This really good data came out. And you know what? I love data because I can use that in conversations and I can use that to leverage an argument. Hey, Austin, I found this really, look at these numbers. We were kind of talking a couple of weeks ago about this, and now, look what a great case study this would be for what you're doing.
Nice.
I didn't give away my time for free. I was relational, and I thought of you, and I gave value to you, right?
You bring up a really good point, which is we have expertise, we have specialized knowledge, but there are other ways to create value for people beyond just giving them advice the way we would if we were already in some sort of paid engagement. So,
100%.
And you can do that in a way that is very personalized, very thoughtful. And it doesn't even necessarily have to be strictly about business, right? You mentioned bourbon, which is a good example. We have, people are multifaceted, right?
Yeah.
We have other ways that we can connect and build rapport beyond just,
listen, I'll spin off that, and here's the reason why. I actually lived at sea on ships for about a decade, and part of why, it was crazy. The series, just sitting on a couch telling you cruise ship stories, was blowing my mind. But what was really cool about it was I was so relational. I was always engaging with people, right? So I built kind of a database of information and things I could talk about. But when I got into kind of technology, when I got out of the cruise business pre-COVID, and I got into kind of regular, just day-to-day technology or software or whatever it was, what blew my mind was that it was so B2B, business to business, whereas I came from pure B2C. I'm trying to get Debbie from Des Moines to be interested in the duty-free products that I'm selling that week, right?
Right.
And what shocked me was how there is no rapport building, relational development in B2B. So, right, I'm always looking to build a champion on the other side. Now, if I'm Nick selling sales consulting to you, the relationship is going to be with you because you're a human, right? And I want to know you, and I want you to be aware of what I do, but then also kind of be in the back of your head a little bit, right? So if I'm sending you something about bourbon, right, I'm building a relationship. And that's where, we talk about referral business, but even if you and I never work together, if I'm always kind of just dropping stuff, but always something interesting or valuable based off the fact that I'm starting to know you, right? Or I know you and I have had a couple chats and I'm like, man, Austin, I think you're so interesting, man. If I'm in Eastern Tennessee, you think I'm not going to try and take you out for coffee?
Right.
That's the other thing too. When you're on the road, what's interesting is oftentimes I'll go on the road. I was in Dallas a couple months ago and I just put it out there on some sort of social media. I forget where I posted it. And a couple of people were like, hey, can I get time with you? And I'm like, well, I'm there for, the company I'm with. However, it doesn't start till 8. So I took a 6 o'clock and a 7 o'clock. So I met people
Nice.
early who were just people, and I wasn't selling them a consulting, but for me, in an hour, I could put them on a different path with their business. So for that hour for me, it wasn't that I was giving it away for free, but then those people, the amount of referrals and references and how my mix, right?
Well,
It becomes that social proof.
and you bring up a really good, I mean, there's so much nuance here, right? Because you can't make this hard and fast rule of like, we'll never help people for free. Because it's like, well, if you're in Dallas and you've got to be there anyway, and you have a chance to connect with somebody over coffee or over drinks or dinner or lunch or whatever, and they ask you a question about sales or business strategy or whatever it is that you're really good at, it would be more awkward to not try to help. And there's a lot to be said for helping people, even because my dad has mentioned this for years, like all the referrals he gets from even people who don't work with him directly. So you bring up a really good point, which is like always default back to being human, you know?
And I'll tell you though, Austin, when I was in Dallas, I didn't give away time for free. I just had coffee with someone I had met on the internet. Just to have coffee. It was just to, they knew what the intention was, but I wasn't saying I'm giving you a free hour. I wasn't saying, hey, I tell you what, Austin, build me a landing page, and if this one goes well, then I'll give you more work coming down the pike. That's in my mind, giving something for free. Really, though, that's how I look at it. Whereas when I'm having coffee with someone, I'm also getting value from them.
That's a good point, yeah.
Because the other thing too, Austin, so this specific, I don't want to use her name, but one of the specific people who came to see me in Dallas, I was also, it keeps me sharp because she was in a really unique field with really unique sales strategy issues. And it was good for me to just think about it, right?
Yeah.
Like I got value out of that beyond the, hey, and when you know someone needs something, send it to me, right?
So good. Two words come to mind: be open. And I think when I was newer to freelancing, I had no idea what I was doing. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know what not to do.
Right.
And I think I got some opportunities that I never really should have gotten because I was open and I was willing to like have the coffee and I was willing to take the meeting. But speaking of being newer, let's say someone has never had to be in a sales role before, right? So maybe they're doing the whole business thing for the first time, solopreneur, consultant, freelancer. Like if you were thinking about the 80-20 rule, what are the 20% of fundamentals that you think are most important or create the biggest impact?
I just wrote them down because I don't want to miss them because they're so key. There's three things you need. The first one's basic. You need a CRM, a customer management system, just something, again, just to track, right? Put little alerts. I talked to Austin today. I'm going to follow up with Austin in 8 days or whatever it is, or whatever triggers that, right? Got to have that. Otherwise, it's Post-it notes. And if you have Post-it notes, you are going to have stuff slip through the cracks. So that's key. I am not someone who works with a lot of structure, but that is the most critical element of having a lot of structure or having structure. Second is understanding the sales process. So what does that mean, right? Because if I meet you at a networking event and I'm like, hey, I could help you, or we have a conversation, I'm like, maybe I could help you with that. The reality is those are kind of the gravy clients. And this is where freelancers, I think, can sometimes misunderstand that you need to go out and reach out to people, however you do that, whether that's creating content, whether that's finding out who your ideal client is and reaching out to them with something interesting. But what is the process? So is the process, okay, reach out. Now they're on the phone with me. So what's step 2? Well, maybe I follow them on social media. What's step 3? Okay, so now I've had the meeting. Now, what's next? The meeting went well, but they didn't buy out of that meeting. What's the next step? So documenting that, and even just Googling, what's the sales process for whatever your business is, or whatever you've hung your shingle up as.
Right.
Whether you're a real estate agent or a chemist. I mean, if you're freelancing, there's a process for whatever it is you're selling. So understanding that, and it doesn't have to be perfect, but I'm looking at a whiteboard here, and I've got a board that's got 40 different little boxes on it, and that's the process that I go through.
Wow.
Right. And so this happens, right? But it's just a mind map thing. This happens. Okay, it goes to this.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, that didn't happen. Now it goes this direction. Now it'll circle back and now we'll retarget it or whatever it is. But understanding, laying that out. And you don't have to be an expert on it, but just taking the time to lay it out and start to understand. And then as you actually say, oh, you know what? This worked really well. I'll give you an example in a second. But that process is so key. Let me come back. Here's a great example. You and I have a meeting scheduled. I haven't met you, Austin. Someone introduced us, okay? Or maybe I was running some Facebook ads or some Instagram ads, and you're like, hey, I'll have a conversation with this guy. Okay, great. So first thing I'll do is 2 days before our meeting, I'm going to send you a custom video. It takes me 15 seconds.
Right. Right.
And I'll say, hey, Austin, how you doing? It's Nick. I'm so excited to talk to you at 9 a.m. Eastern on Friday. First thing I'm doing is confirm the time. And I'm excited to talk to you about, what you asked about. I just want to let you know in advance, if you do have any questions or want to make sure I cover anything specifically, just go ahead and write them in this email, and I'll be ready when I talk to you Friday at 9 a.m. Can't wait.
So good.
15 seconds. Your meeting holder will go from this to this, right? And all that matters is yield, Austin, right? Because the reality is it costs me, if my cost to acquire a client is $1,000, okay, I'm working out of this bin right now. If I get more people to show up, if I get 30% more people to show up, that means my costs drop from $1,000 minus 30%, right? Because I'm just working out of, you're just talking to more people, and you talk to more people, you're going to win. So that's a process thing that I do now. Like that is part of my process. That someone comes on my calendar, great. 2 days before, I send that video.
Yeah,
that's an example.
So simple too, or it's not necessarily easy until you build it into your process. It would be easy to forget. I mean, but you're touching on things that don't force somebody to become this like high pressure sales guy that so many people have had bad experiences with.
Often, that's why it's easy to teach this, because that is the stereotype that everyone has, right? So, but let me get to the third one, because we talked about your CRM, we talked about your process. Let's get to now, my company, salespitching.com. The most key, but that is your pitch, right? And this is where, so you've done all the work, you've got someone excited, and then you flub the presentation, but you probably don't realize you flubbed it, right? So people ask me all the time, how many, I need a 45-second elevator, that's it, right? No, you need 4. Okay, you got to have 4 pitches. One is your half an hour demonstration. Okay, so this is leading them down the path, getting them understanding, what you do and why, case studies, etc. Got to have that. You need to be prepared and have that ready. It doesn't take long. You know what you're talking, because this is a quick sidebar. You're talking from a place of knowledge. You know what you're good at, right? I don't know cars. I can't talk about cars. I'm not great with bourbon, but hockey. I can talk about hockey. I can talk about cooking. But if I wanted to create content, if I wanted to create a presentation, I can talk about cooking for 4 hours. Here's when I use a cast iron skillet. Oh, this is the best way to clean a cast iron skillet. Listen, the point is I know those things. Right. You know the things about what you do, okay? So you need to have that 30-minute demo down. That's got to be tight. You need a 3-minute higher level conversation. So this is, think your 45-second elevator, but with a couple case studies baked in, right? Specific to, hey, Austin, actually it's funny. I just told you about what I did, but I was actually working with a client very similar to you, and this was their pain point. This is where they were at before we started working together, and this is where we got them to, So it might be something interesting, right? So that's your 3-minute. Your 45-second is, hey, here's who I am. Here's how niche down I am, and you want to get niche. So if you're freelancing, the more niche you get, the better. That's a whole other conversation.
Preach, Nick, preach.
And then this is why we're really good to do business with. That's your 45 second. That's your traditional elevator, right?
Mm-hmm.
But then this is the toughest. What do you do in 10 words, right?
Oh, yeah, that one's hard. I think it was.
But Austin, that's the most important. That's the most key one, because if you can't answer that, if you haven't taken the time to have thought about that and understand what that is in like 8, 9, 10, 11 words, if it's not a distilled down, effective line,
So true.
right? And I'm going to tell you how to solve all this. Here's the answer to all this. This
I'm
is the
ready.
best hack ever. Actually, you might need to. This might have to be. There might have to be a pay-per-view on this part of it.
Okay. This is the good stuff, right?
No, but this is how you solve all this. Open up a Word document. If you're PC, if you're Mac, open up Pages. They both have a dictate option. Click dictate. Talk about what you do for 30 minutes, Austin. If you need me there as a prop, I'll do it. Have your partner there as a prop.
Right.
If you can talk about it. If you're doing a demo, right, and you don't want to record it or they want that privacy, you're not going to watch it anyway. You should. That's another conversation for another day, but you need to rewatch your tape. But just open that Word document. If you talk for half an hour, you're going to get 8 pages of single-spaced copy. 8 pages is what you do. What's the key words in there? Like the really good ones.
Right.
What's the key phrasing? If you don't take the time to read those 8 pages with a highlighter, you're going to miss them.
You bring up a good point, which is when we speak aloud or when we're in a conversation with a friend over copy, we're just a lot less likely to use a bunch of jargon and to try to make ourselves sound impressive by using, the industry slang.
Yeah.
And even listening to you talk about like, oh, here's what I do, here's why that's important, here's why we're easy to work with. It's such basic and accessible language, right? And so again, you're an old pro at this, and so you're doing this intuitively, but you're not, I heard it put this way, it's like, it's not that people are dumb, but it's that you're so far ahead of them, you don't know what it's like to talk to another person about content marketing or software development or all these different specializations, areas of expertise, right? And so by speaking aloud, you almost force yourself to be conversational, which makes what you're saying a lot more accessible.
100%. And I think what's really interesting is, oh man, there's so much I could get into here, Austin. I'm trying to keep it tight. The reason that I think I learned how to make it as easy and digestible as possible wasn't intentional. What happened was when I was on the cruise ship, I had hundreds of people under me, and they weren't from America or Canada, like I am originally.
So you're having to translate into the most basic English that you can.
I have to teach people from India and Serbia how to deal with Mary from Mississippi, right, and Doug from Denver. So how do you do that? How does that look? How does that work? But the point is, it wasn't because of a language barrier. But I couldn't teach them a culture. I couldn't teach them if they were talking to someone from Wisconsin the history of the Packers, right? Because then you have easy that Americans can all get along. But one of the things I would do was I would always talk about cooking or food. So I meet someone from New Mexico. I'm talking about hatch green chilies. They're like, how do you know about hatch green? How do you know? Well, now they're my friends. Right?
That's right.
So, and what's really interesting, Austin, there's 25 major U.S. cities you sell into. What do you know about those cities? What do you know about Seattle? What do you know about Boise? What do you know about Detroit? Right? Can you Google, if I'm talking to someone, Google Detroit news? Even though Detroit's the best answer, but really though, I always take a couple of minutes and go through the LinkedIn profile and go into that. Another conversation for another day. But I'm looking for these Easter eggs.
Yes.
Give me conversational talking points.
That's so good. And that's a perfect segue because I know we're running up against time. Give me like rapid fire when you're trying to get the first appointment or even after you've held that call. Maybe you've even had a second call. Now you need to follow up. What are all of the little tricks of the trade? What you just said about looking at the LinkedIn profile, that's really good because it's easy to show up to a call having spent 2 minutes and having just 3 talking points that you could use if you wanted to, right? So that's a really good one. Rapid fire, other stuff like that comes to mind that you really wish more people would do.
Use video. And this is the key. In the subject line, you start with parentheses, 24-second personal video, right? Hey, Austin, how are you? Look, I really appreciate you taking the time to have that discussion. I know you want to take a few days. A couple of ideas that actually popped into my head post was, and this might be really interesting too. That's something we might want to dig down in our next conversation. Thanks so much. Can't wait. My calendar's just below the video. Have a great day. Right? What did I do? I've opened up multiple doors. Or it depends on how you're looking at it. I'm either opening doors or I'm removing barriers. Right? Depends if you're looking up or down.
Video. It's so obvious. And you mentioned Loom before we started talking. There's Bomb, there's Dub, DUBB, Vidyard. That's right. And the tools are there. They're not expensive. I think Loom has a pretty decent free account. But
excellent. Yep.
So that's huge. And last question. What is one of the stranger things you've ever done to follow up? Does anything come to mind?
I showed up with 8 pounds of Franklin barbecue to someone's front porch in Austin, Texas, in February of this year. That got me a meeting.
How did you know that I love Franklin barbecue? I have the t-shirt. I have the hat. That's really good barbecue.
This person I was really trying to get a meeting with canceled the meeting, right? And said, look, I apologize. I'm just super busy. When am I going to be in Austin next? I'm thinking. I'm like, so my response was, no problem. I pre-ordered some Franklin. Just if you're okay giving me your address, let me know, I'll drop it off. And he was like, well, if you're going to bribe me with food, I can't.
You still got the meeting.
Yeah, I did. Oh, yeah. Not only did I get the meeting, but you show up with 8 pounds of barbecue. You know how like the halo of that.
Yeah,
right?
it's like
halo,
like meat sweat halo, or so. That's a horrible image. Sorry, but okay. So I want to pull a principle out of that, which is when you get the no or things don't go the way you had hoped, how resilient and creative are you going to be in the face of rejection or even just disappointment? And it sounds like you are still looking for the opportunity to just make that connection with someone.
100%. Because when you make the effort and you show effort and you're a little bit creative and a little bit clever, and if you're dealing with a lot of freelancers, they're creative and clever generally, right?
Yes.
Just think differently. What would no one else do? Because look, like that tip, no one's going to show up with barbecue, right? But 3% of people use video in their sales process. I'm talking sales people. 3%. 3%, right? So how do you stand out? You'd be the one. No one is expecting that. If you're freelancing to dentists, no one's expecting a video 2 days in advance saying, hey, if you have any questions, let me know. You get a list of questions. I already know the pain points. You know how easy it becomes for me to now go through that path? Right?
So good. When they zig, you zag. Like, what is no one else going to do that? Nick, I really appreciate you. I love your stories. I could listen to you talk for hours. You're just dropping Easter eggs all over the place. But thank you so much for sharing your wisdom and stories with us today. I really appreciate it.
A pleasure. Check me out on salespitching.com.
Salespitching.com. Actually, is there anywhere else people can find you, or is that the place?
No, LinkedIn. Just send me, let me know you heard me here. Always add a note when you connect with someone on LinkedIn. And just say, hey, I was listening to you with Austin. Yeah, absolutely. Love to connect.
Perfect. Thank you again, Nick.
Pleasure.
See ya.